Silu, which is, of course, Welsh for Achtung, Achtung. Please, I beg and plead forgiveness from Welsh speakers for my ignorance. The translation comes from listener Andy Pritchard. Thanks, Andy. He got in touch with us this week with a brilliant account of his great-uncle's experiences on HMS Bulldog. More of that a little later. But welcome, one and all, to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. I hope you enjoyed my reading of The Cauldron. The last chapter was released on Easter Sunday. You can catch up anytime wherever you get your podcast. They got out of Oosterbeek. We're still in lockdown.
There's no escape.
There is no escape. There isn't even a Rhine to swim in desperate moments.
Stalag 4 in Wiltshire.
Oh, gosh. I'm now deep into my next reading, Dennis Barnum's One Man's Window, which is about Dennis's time as a Spitfire pilot in Malta. And it is absolutely sensational. And the thing is when we talked about putting this book together, James kept going, "You're going to love it. It's absolutely sensational." And it is. It's the most extraordinary book.
I was worried I'd slightly overcooked it, to be honest.
Well, I thought, I'm thinking, he's oversold this. There's no way it's that good. Oh, here we go. And it is, when he takes two other guys up, because they've only got 3 serviceable Spitfires, and up they go, and there's like 50 Ju-88s and hundreds, and he talks about the stack of 109s in, the Germans flying in their Finger 4, but it goes from 1,000 feet to 30,000 feet, and they're all watching each other. The Finger 4s are all treating each other as Finger 4s, and it's spread out like a concertina. And if you attack the guys at the bottom, the guys at the top will get you. And there's no point attack. It's just amazing. It's an amazing book.
I'll tell you, one of the things that I loved about it as well was that a lot of those memoirs, particularly the ones that came just out just after the war, they're all a bit sort of, well, that was a little bit hairy, I don't mind admitting I was a teeny bit scared at that point, and it's also uncut. And what he conveys really, really well is I just think reading that, I think, yeah, I'd be feeling the same way. You really sense the kind of the raw fear, the kind of, he has all these thoughts, doesn't he, about, what he's going to be reduced to, his body when he's hit or burned or whatever. All of which are incredibly kind of, as you imagine someone
There's a
in this situation would be.
Really great bit where he writes about how the plane is metal, and even if the plane is blown up or destroyed or crashes, it will still be identifiably metal. But if he is smashed to pulp or burned or charred or destroyed, and people will either not be able to recognise that he was ever even human, or will make smart remarks, so smart jokes, he says, over what remains of my dead body. And he's talking about that, and you think, God, this is really good. And the second chapter, when he's on his way to Malta, he does a long thing about fear and how he copes with fear and seeing fear in others, because there's some sortie he's supposed to go on, and he's drawn not to fly, and so he's in the room with everyone who's about to go flying, and he thinks, Christ, is this what I'm like? Oh my God, and can feel the fear in the room, and then spots someone who is lost in the fear and goes and talks to them and tries to talk about it. It is a really great book, and aside from that, the descriptions of flying and fighting in the air are amazing. And I was worried you'd oversold it to me, but it's as good as you said it was.
He also gets across very well the heat, doesn't he, and the dust and the flies and the discomfort and the Malta dog, which is kind of dysentery, effectively.
Yeah.
And all that just comes across. You realise that. I mean, there's that great line about that from that Battle of Britain pilot who comes over to Malta and goes, God, Malta makes the Battle of Britain look like child's play compared with this, and you sort of get that with this book. I think he gets it so vividly. But I'm so glad you enjoyed it.
He talks about how they can't, that they've got to develop tactics, but they can't train. Because every time they go up, they've got to go up to meet a raid, and they can't practice any. So they sit around and talk about it, and then he's thinking, well, the people who survived are the experienced pilots, and there's a whole lot of pilots who have no experience, and they're going to need to learn how to lead. So he takes the 3 Spitfires, he gets someone else to lead, because they're going to have to at some point if he's shot down. I mean, it really is great. It's a nail biter. I mean, obviously, 18 chapters of it. He wrote the book. He's going to get through unscathed, or if scathed, recoverably scathed. I mean, that first sortie he goes on when he's, he gets shot down. I mean, the thing is, you can deliver all the spoilers you want with this book, but it remains amazing. So, an excellent choice. Thank you, James.
Well, it's a bit like watching the Cricket World Cup final yesterday live again, as live. And you're just thinking, they can't do it.
Yeah,
15 or 4.
impossible.
It can't be done. So, I think that the spoiler alert doesn't really spoil it at all.
Ben Stokes and a Spitfire. Basically, that's what this book is. Right, so, but talking of finishing books, he's only gone and done it, ladies and gentlemen. Friends of the Independent Company. James Holland is here, ladies and gentlemen, fresh from his metaphorical journey through Sicily. You finished, right?
Yeah. Oh, my God. It was just,
Final full stop?
Epic. Friday was a massive day. It was massive. But yeah, I got there. I got there on time. So I'll hand it in tomorrow, having read through it over the weekend. And one of the key things I've got out of this is this sort of, and actually we should definitely try and put this up on the Independent Company as a discussion point, is why were the Allies too slow? Is basically the long and short of it. And one of the things you realise is actually it's not really to do with a lack of tactical chutzpah. It's just because they're so mechanised. And when you're very, very mechanised, moving quickly in advance is really difficult unless you happen to be in the Russian steppes, because you simply don't have the space. And you realise that all the arguments about, 30 Corps are being too slow, again, going up through Sicily, for example, on this occasion, not going up towards Nijmegen, it's because there's only a certain amount of roads, and you need those roads. They are your arteries. They're your axes for going northwards or west or wherever you're trying to get to. And there's only so much traffic you can fit on that. And there's this just amazing diary of this gunner. He's the second in command of, I think it's the 17th Field Artillery Regiment. And just the problems of trying to deploy your guns, let alone get them from A to B. So you stagger up this hairpin bend, you go up to the top of Centoripe. You're then struggling all morning to try and give the fire support that's required, because you just can't deploy anywhere. You can't deploy anywhere that's properly camouflaged, that gives you safety, or you just physically can't get off the road. Because it's not just a 25-pounder you've got to sort out, it's also the limber with the ammunition in it and the quad that tows it. I mean, a 25-pounder in motion is quite a big old bit of kit. Then you've got to get through Centoripe, which is incredibly narrow. So there's only one road round the edge of town that will actually cope with the size. Then you've got to get down. And of course, as the Germans retreated, they've blown bits of road up. So you've then got to get... You can just see how there's the biggest log jam ever. And you're in plain view of the Germans on the next hill. So you can see why this whole thing starts to grind down. And in fact, I mean, I've been to Sicily, as you know, a number of times, and we're going to be going there soon now, as soon as the restrictions lift, and go and film out there. But when you're standing on Azoro or on Agira or Centoripe or at Troina, and you just look at the next hill and the next hill and the next hill, and you know you've got to take one after the other, conquering that island in 38 days, you just go, do you know what? That is a bloody good effort, and you cannot understand how anyone could possibly complain.
Because after all, the Germans never conquered Sicily, did they? They just occupied it. They never had to. They never had to grind through it and winkle allies out. So actually saying slow compared to what? If it's like it's like when people talk about Normandy and they say, well, the Allies should have been more like the Germans in 1940 and been more blitzkriegi. And you think, well, you're comparing apples with monkey wrenches, not even apples and oranges, right? Because after all, the Germans conduct a static defence in Normandy, not a fluid one. That's the blitzkriegi defence. The Germans aren't like the Germans in 1940 either. So you're holding the Allies to like a weird standard if you do that, And of course, the Germans never had to grind their way through Normandy either. They simply drove there because the French army was somewhere else, and so on. You know what I mean. So often these comparisons, you have to come down to compared to what, and when you said compared to the steppes, that's the right comparison compared to the Red Army, because it's actually about how you beat the Germans. It's not about whether you're quick or slow compared to the Germans. It's about how you beat the Germans tactically, right, in the environment you find yourselves fighting them in. And so many of the places the Germans ended up defending, they never had to militarily seize, did they?
Right. No. It's a really good point. And the point about Sicily, and particularly that northeast bit, the central and northeast bit, is it just all the aces are with the defenders. It just completely lends itself to that. And of course, because the northeast tip of Sicily tapers, you can pull back in phases and pull guys out of the line and get them across the Straits of Messina, while still, because you don't need very many men. And the Allies coming towards you can't just chuck lots of manpower and machinery at it, because there isn't the space. There just isn't the space to manoeuvre. And that's the problem. And you see this particularly with the Americans on the North Coast Road. So that they're tight. What they do is move very fast in all their vehicles and trucks and half tracks and tanks and all the rest of it. What they suddenly can't do is do any of that, because they're on a coastal road which has got lots of hairpins and tunnels and have blown bits, because as the Germans retreat, they just blow everything up. They blow every bridge up, they blow up bits of roads, they put rocks in front of the tunnels, and it's just incredibly frustrating. And this highly mechanised army have to resort to using mules. I mean, again, the fact that they're doing this in a matter of weeks, is really, really impressive. And particularly for armies which have never done this before. Britain might have been at war since 1939, but it's never fought in this kind of terrain, in these kind of circumstances where you are being supplied by supply chains which are coming over the water. That's just never happened before. And they're doing it for the first time.
Well, since Portugal, since the Peninsular War. It's the first time they've done it since the Peninsular War, on a large scale. So there is no muscle memory for this. And the last time there was an attempt to supply by sea for this kind of front is Gallipoli. And and we all know how well that
and everyone's very
out.
aware of what happened there. Yeah. Anyway, so I'm very glad I got it, and I feel it's Carlo D'Este's book is really good, and there's another really good book guy called a pair of people, an American called Mitchum and a German called Stauffenberg, obviously, and their little account of the Battle of Sicily, they're also very good, but they both go into this kind of Alexander lacked grip. Monty was a total arsehole. Everyone was really slow. They made catastrophic errors. The fact that they got, the Germans got away. I was talking to Steve Prince the other day about this, who's the head of the Naval Historical Branch, and who's, he's brilliant on all this stuff. And he just said, you're talking about 39,000 Germans escaping from Sicily, of which 25,000 are the guys that actually went through on the Operation Lehrgang, which is the main evacuation bit. So the other 15 are people that have gone earlier than that because they're ill or they're casualties or they're staff officers or whatever. So 25,000 out of 4.5 divisions. I mean, that's not enough to make 2 divisions. And the idea that is going to make or break the next phase of the campaign in Italy is just nonsense.
But basically, don't start at the bottom. It's what it comes down to with Italy. That's which I really, when it comes to it, if that's the pithiest single thing. Don't start. Next time you're invading Italy, don't start at the bottom. And you think, it's quite hard to argue with that.
Fair enough. I'll try and get a bit more shipping in beforehand.
Yeah, of course. Right, okay. Now let's start with and when's that out? When's that in all good bookshops, as they used to say?
3rd of September 1939, and you'll be pleased to know that Monty comes out of it really pretty well.
Oh, good, excellent. 3rd of September, and
I think he did really well. I think he did well in it.
At this rate, I'll be doing my audio.
I can't really fault him.
I'll be doing the audio book here in my underpants, like I've done everything else. There's an image for you. Me reading Zeno's novel in my keks in my office.
However, Patton gets a slightly more mixed press.
Oh, James. I can't wait to read this book.
I've got to say.
Right, now let's start with Andy Pritchard's email. He sent us the memories of his great uncle, John Williams, which were jotted down before he passed away. John was a radio artificer on HMS Bulldog. What's a radio artificer, James?
It's just a signals man. It's artificer it's like a senior NCO.
Right, okay. That's a naval title, isn't it? Okay. Right, let's hear his story.
Yeah.
We were on one of our trips to take a convoy to America. We only went as far as Iceland before being released by Canadian and US escorts, and had taken over the convoy back to the UK. At that time, the U-boats were hunting in packs of about 6. One escort, HMS Bulldog, made contact with a U-boat and dropped a pattern of depth charges, bringing the sub to the surface. We had made our way to the rear of the convoy to assist Obrisia, but when the sub surfaced, the crew made for their forward gun. The signalman on the bridge, armed with a stripped Lewis gun, immediately opened fire and stopped that happening. The crew then came around the conning tower with their hands up, but Frankie Upex kept firing until the captain stopped him. Obrisia then picked up the survivors, and later we took the U-110 in tow, and the survivors were transferred to Bulldog. Our engineer officer went aboard the U-boat to make sure it was safe to board before sending a boarding party in our whaler, which included Alan Long, one of my telegraphists, to take over the sub. When the whaler returned to Bulldog, Alan brought what we thought was a typewriter to the WT office. The confidential books and other stuff were taken to the captain's cabin. When things had settled down to the towing, Alan and I had a look at the typewriter, and seeing the voltage marked was 110 volts, the same as the ship's supply, we plugged it in. When we pressed the keys on the keyboard, German letters were lit up on the top of the machine. The sub stayed afloat on tow for a couple of days and then started to sink, so the boarding party returned, and when it became too dangerous to keep in tow, the tow was cut and she sank. It was intended that we towed U-110 to Scapa Flow, but we arrived there without the sub, and the intelligence officers came aboard to question both the boarding party and the survivors. When they heard about our typewriter, we got a good roasting because the machine was the Enigma coding machine, and Alan Long had taken the wheels and all information off U-110, so it was a real cache. Wow. Alan eventually got the DSM for his efforts, but sadly was lost on Avenger when she went down in the Med. Alan was our son David's godfather, and our next son Alan was named after him. Blimey.
Yeah, that's a great story. Well, Bulldog's a legend. I mean, it's a legendary destroyer. Doing it, it's the cruel sea stuff. I mean, there it is. And actually, U-110, that's Lemp, and Lemp was the guy who I think shot down, who sank the Athenia on day one of the war.
Wow.
Yeah. I think that's what it was. I was struggling to remember that last time we were talking about it, but I think Lemp was that. Yeah, it's a really, really famous incident. May 1941, wasn't it?
Yeah, historic moment there. But to actually got their hands on an Enigma.
Yeah, absolutely incredible, absolutely incredible. And it's one of those things that, I've always argued that we got to a stage where we weren't going to lose the Battle of the Atlantic by May 1941. And that is one of the key moments did an
Enigma not have a stick of dynamite in that the captain was obliged to detonate if he was found in this situation? I mean, this is quite interesting, isn't it? Is that you think if they've got time to surrender the U-boat to they surrender the U-boat. Surely someone's taken a sledgehammer to the Enigma. This is pretty slack, isn't it? Of the Kriegsmarine, they're not doing the job properly.
I mean, I don't know the answer for that. Cock-ups happen.
Well, because Eureka, as the listeners of the Xeno know, Eureka had an explosive in it so that you could destroy it so it wouldn't fall into enemy hands, because it was regarded as, the most incredibly super secret piece of equipment. And yet, one of the things is the Enigmas are everywhere. The Enigma's like a standard piece of kit, so they're absolutely everywhere. So you're gonna find one eventually, aren't you? It's whether you can crack the damn thing. Of course, is the thing the Germans didn't consider. But I'm just intrigued by this. Surely you'd take a sledgehammer or you'd tear out and you'd lob it in the sea. I mean, it's not like you're short of opportunities to get rid of the bloody thing.
Yeah, the other thing about Enigma machines is the fact that the Germans never understood that we'd cracked the code, which I find absolutely amazing as well. And, that was because, every time Enigma picked up something, you'd then send over a plane to look like it was and there was quite a lot of times where we didn't use our knowledge of Enigma decrypts because it might give the game away. But even so, you would have thought it wouldn't take a kind of too many brains to go, do you know what? Do you think, just bear with me on this one, do you think they might have cracked it?
All our U-boats have been sunk. And they're all communicating the same way with each other.
But this is impossible. Yeah. I've just looked up 110. No, I was wrong about that. That wasn't the one that sunk the Athenia. I was talking absolute nonsense.
Oh, no. Oh, dear. Well, that's a great story to start.
Lemp was the commander.
Right. Well, that's a great story to start the show.
That was the connection.
Even though you wrong-footed James there, Andy. Well done. Nice work. Now, for those of you who don't know, we started a members club last week called the Independent Company, and I'm delighted to say we've got more than 400 volunteers already. So eventually we're going to have to change from being a company to a battalion. That's what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to...
What is that once we get past 845?
Yeah, once we're past 845, we become the independent battalion. After that, we aim at brigade. Then we go division. Then army group.
And then we go to 30 Corps.
Oh, right. Well, but thanks for everyone. Thanks for everyone for coming in on board on that. It was really exciting. Last week we debated a different issue each day. We produced a live stream on Thursday night. And despite some slight comms difficulties, congratulations to everyone who bore with us. And I live blogged Where Eagles Dare last night. If any of you are feeling the effects of that, God bless you all. There'll be another live stream on Thursday, and it may even start on time this week at 8:30 p.m. Now, we asked our volunteers, independent company members, what their favourite Second World War gizmo was, and here's a selection of your answers. Alexander Lyons suggested garlic-infused chocolate so SOE agents would smell like the locals.
And Samuel Langley Clifford said the bouncing bomb was kind of awesome. It was kind of awesome, I'll give you that.
Yeah, neat. Mike Boland suggested the toy clacker that the airborne used to identify each other during D-Day. By the way,
No, definitely not. That's the most annoying thing ever. Don't ever buy that for a child.
Where's mine? I've got one on the desk here somewhere.
No, don't.
Damn, I can't find it. Otherwise we'd be being.
Oh, that's a
we'd
shame.
Be straight into clicker hell now. Funnily enough, at the weekend, I persuaded my daughter Willow that she really wanted to watch Band of Brothers. Because she's a big Friends fan, and I go, it's got David Schwimmer in it. You're going to love it, right? And so we are watching Band of Brothers, and you know what? It is remarkable how it hasn't dated as a piece of television.
It's so good, isn't it?
And it is so good. Just but the main thing you take away from it is the absolute horror, the relentless horror, and just chance of fighting, of when infantry close with each other or infantry close on armour or whatever. It's just absolutely terrifying, the whole thing, and the randomness of it. And that, because in the second episode where they assault that gun position, and they, you run round the corner and there's two Germans setting up, and you have to kill them because they're, it's just the sort of sheer speed of those scenes is absolutely brilliant done. Anyway, what's the next gizmo, James? Sorry to digress.
Yes, so this is David Howard Carr wrote, Miss Schilling's orifice, got to be. It fixed the Merlin carburettor.
What's that? Because it's
okay, so the problem is
saucy.
that what happens is when you vert, the float goes up, and that
cuts
off the
thing.
fuel. So
you want to
so Miss Schilling's orifice is make sure that the float doesn't go up when you have negative gravity and stays in place so the fuel stays, because that was what gave the 109E against the Spitfire Mark 1.
Oh, here we go. He's slagging off the Spitfire Mark 1 again.
That crucial advantage when diving.
Unbelievable. He's having another go at the Spitfire. Amazing. Okay, we're going to take a break now while I berate James off air for having a go at the Spitfire yet again. It's almost as though he doesn't like the aeroplane one bit. We'll see you in a tick. Welcome back to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. We'd asked for favourite gizmos from the Second World War and excellent answers, but the answer is, of course, the correct answer is, of course, the Piat. Britain's unique and quite excellent
preeminent gizmo.
I mean, a spigot mortar as an anti-tank weapon. Yeah, get with the program, people. You can keep your cathode ray tubes, cavity magnetrons, and your
No. I love the cavity magnetron.
Of course you do. Right. So we have one of the really wonderful things we've had since we set up the Patreon, and there's 400 of you on there now. The independent company at Massed Strength Company. That's that's including all the clerks and cooks and everyone, admin troops. We're forming our own little box here. We've asked you to send in your family stories, and one of the strands we have on the Patreon is people's family stories, because after all, the Second World War touched everybody basically. That it involved everyone one way or another. Christopher Smith wrote in to say, my stepmom's father served as a wireless operator, air gunner in number 9 B Squadron, first in Wellington's, then in Lancaster's. His aircraft was WSJ for Johnny Walker, bought and paid for by the Whiskey Company. Every crew member who finished a tour in her honour got a case of whiskey and a framed photo on of the nose art. I know he got the DFM. He said it was simply for surviving the Nuremberg raids, and he took part in the Peenemünde and Tirpitz attacks. Johnny Walker finished the war with 106 sorties. Wow. I mean, that's an awful lot of sorties out of a lank. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Really
that's
lucky.
beyond what's normally expected, isn't
Yeah,
it?
lucky to get through all that. Amazing. I mean, there were sort of sponsored aircraft, weren't there? And you got sort of local drives and things, and to pay for aircraft, and that kind of starts with Beaverbrook, doesn't it? In the Battle of Britain, he does these sort of localized drives to get people to spend money on kit, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a Spitfire Fund and all that, and people ended up, because they started off sponsoring individual planes, and then they sponsored whole squadrons. So you have, you know, they're sort of named after towns and little
City of Exeter and Lincoln and all that sort of thing. Yeah.
All that kind of stuff, yeah. And it's a brilliant way. It just makes people feel involved, and obviously, I mean, the problem about the Spitfire Fund was they said, you know, if you get £5,000 worth of scrap metal, that's a Spitfire. Obviously, it was kind of a bit more than that, but that wasn't the point. It was just a PR thing, really. It was really to kind of
mobilise people.
The Spitfire Fund originally, but later on, the contributions were, you know, not insignificant. I mean, you know, if you've got other countries funding your squadrons, what's not to like?
Yeah. It's
good
all,
effort.
all that. It's interesting because yes, it's PR, but it's also the right kind of PR. It's not simply empty propaganda as a device. It's got functionality to it as a mobilising thing for the population, isn't it? It's not like I'm trying to think of a sort of Goebbels example that would be analogous to it. I can't think of one.
Well, the modern example is Jos Butler kind of funding, you know, new kit for hospitals or footballers buying ventilators, isn't it? I mean, I guess.
Exactly. Okay.
Anyway,
have we got another
cracking story? Yeah, from Ian Strong. He says, I wanted to share the story of the only Bomber Command veteran I've ever met. Well, you know, everyone should meet one at some point in their life, that's for sure. And if you haven't, get on with it.
Well, can I just, before you read it, I'll tell you the one I met. I did the Cologne Comedy Festival when I first started out as a comic. And this is like in 1991, 92, and there were people going, oh, I can't believe there's a comedy festival in Germany. Germans don't have a sense of humour. And you just think, oh, fucking stroll on with that. Anyway, the point is, when I flew back from there, we had it was a European arts festival, so we had business class flights, and everyone was very well looked after, and we were all very well paid. It wasn't like here. And I remember coming in, I was sat with a German guy and an old British guy, right? And the old British guy goes, "Well, I tell you, this side of the Thames Estuary is entirely reassuring." And we're like, what? He goes, well, of course, when one saw this glistening in the early morning light, one was delighted and one knew one had made it home at last, right? And he went on to then tell us that he'd been in Bomber Command, and you know what an incredible sight the English coast was, like how happy it made you. And then he said to the German guy next to him, you know, when we were sat either side of him, he said, and thank goodness here we are flying together in peace, and you know that I'm not having to do this to make this journey the way I used to have to. And we all toasted each other with a glass of champagne. And, you know, it was a truly beautiful moment. I mean, that sounds like a sort of an anecdote that you'd make up to make a point, but that did actually happen to me. Anyway, back to this story.
Back to Ian Strong and his only experience of meeting a Bomber Command veteran. Flight Lieutenant Reg Barker was a Lancaster pilot from 635 Squadron at Downham Market. They were part of 8 Group and therefore Pathfinders. On the 26th of August 1944, they were sent to bomb Kiel. Right. After bombing the intended target and heading home, an explosion and a vivid flash threw the aircraft onto its back. They were hit by schräge music, and the tail section of the aircraft came away from the rest of the plane. Out of control, the Lank was heading to Earth, and Reg was pinned to the ceiling of the canopy due to centrifugal force. He struggled to get out. I'm not surprised. The next thing he was aware of, he was out of the plane and on his parachute. He'd never had a clue how he actually got out. He then saw out the rest of the war in Stalag Luft 1. 2 of his crew died. The rest all got home after the war. When I met him, I could have listened for hours. Wow.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Absolutely amazing. And, you know, schräge music was an absolute bitch. There's no going around it. I mean, basically, what the whole point of this was, you'd have it on the dorsal side of the fuselage, pointing upwards. It could be a 30mm cannon, not necessarily a 20mm, and you'd home in on the Lancaster. You'd go underneath it and then just fire, and it would point upwards and go into the belly of it.
They had a great, didn't they, that listened out for the H2S.
Yes.
On the note, so the classic image is the thing that looks like it's got like one of those things for drying your washing on in your garden.
Yep.
On the front of the nose of the measure
That's right.
split, 110 or 210, and then a cannon, and it's Schrager angled music. Jazz is what Schrager music means, and it would point up at an angle, and they'd home in. Come in under the Lank, which has no belly gun,
No protection at all.
no protection at all, and apparently for quite a while the RAF Bomber Command had simply no idea what was taking these planes out, because of course they were hit fatally, and none of the crew would survive, and even if I'm sure Reg Barker, when this happened to him, didn't really know what had happened, that they were being attacked from beneath. No. And I mean, we talked about Hamburg a lot recently because I went there. It's part of the revamp that happens to German night fighter.
That's right.
Systems after Hamburg, is that they think, right, we've been doing this wrong with our box system and the Wildsau and the Tamesau and all that sort of thing, and they get into this, they invent this, and there's kind of no reply to it, is there? That you've got to keep them peeled, and you've got to hope that you don't get homed in on. It's as simple as that, isn't it?
And the question is why weren't these Lancasters, why weren't they protected there? And why are they still equipped with .303 Brownings, which are kind of sort of next level? Why don't they have 50 caliber? And what's really interesting is that Harris, from the moment that Schrager music comes in, is repeatedly lobbying the Air Ministry and going, get my Lancasters better armed. Get them better armed. Get better turrets. Get heavier guns. He does it all the time, and he gets absolutely nowhere. And it's one of those things where, history suggests that Harris is this omnipotent, all-powerful kind of, war leader who whatever he says goes. And it's not. He has superiors above him. He is a subordinate. And there are massive checks on his authority.
Well, and also
one of them is his inability to procure these heavy machine guns.
And also, Harris has picked his battles and fought them, and maybe had burned up the kind of goodwill he needed in order to be able to go to someone and say, "I need better kit."
Yeah,
because his manner is, and there's that fantastic thing where he sent some report to I think to attack a synthetic oil plant, and the notes in the margin is him going, "Says you." And they go, "This, if we attack this, it will have a magnetic, like a dynamic effect on the German war effort." And he just writes "says you" across it because he kept his. I mean, that's one of the interesting things about it. He kept his own counsel. So maybe the moments when he needed to actually reach out to people and get help weren't going to pan out for him. And maybe also, you've got at the Air Ministry and others making calculations. Well, if we spend it on this, we won't be able to spend it on that, which is, after all, the endless, relentless calculation. Which is why, when you look at the, let's say the Piat, which we just mentioned now, which is the point of the Piat is it's dirt cheap, it's man portable. And if you're well trained, you can use it. But the point is, it's dirt cheap. A more expensive weapon might require more spending that you then can't spend on something else, and those are always, even though the Allies act like they've got a bottomless pit, they don't, and they are making economies, and all, like you've talked about before, like you make cheaper uniforms because then you can spend the money on something else.
Yeah, I've never thought about that. I've never thought that about Harris before. That's a really, really good point, and I'm sure there's something in that. I mean, it's very interesting. There's a guy who called Roy something or other, who wrote a book about this, about the sort of how outrageous it was that that Lancasters were and heavy bombers were so underarmed, and he wrote a whole entire book on it. But and he gets a bit carried away, it has to be said. But there are really, really fascinating bits in it, and one of them is this piece of this document he finds in the archives at Cranwell somewhere, which is the the Air College, and it dates from, I think, 1926. And it's this report into the effectiveness of a Browning machine gun as a weapon in air-to-air fighting. And the report says, I could not recommend this weapon as an air-to-air to be used in air-to-air combat under any circumstances. It's like firing a pea shooter.
Oh!
There you go.
There we go. Right, well, that I'm afraid is all we've got time for. I'll be putting my pea shooter down until the next time. Remember, we'll be live streaming on Thursday night. Open a bottle of wine or a lightly chilled beer and join us for that. I drank all that whiskey that I was drinking that night, largely out of technology-induced stress. Details on Twitter or on our Patreon site. Fantastic level of correspondence in the past 10 days or so. Let's get this independent company up to being a battalion. Do keep it coming. Lots of ways now to get in touch. There really is no excuse not to. I mean, I suppose in the end we could be a regiment.
Oh, where do people join now? Where do people join?
Well, if they
want to,
if they go to @WeHaveWaysPod on Twitter, the Patreon is there, or they Google "We Have Ways of Making You Talk" Patreon, and they'll find it. Rather than reading out your clumsy web address, Google it, you fools. We have tweet us using the.
Where is the recruiting sergeant?
Tweet us using the hashtag #WeHaveWays. We also have a Twitter handle to follow @WeHaveWaysPod. Email us if you're ancient at WeHaveWaysPodcast@gmail.com. Actually, I'm going to waive the old thing because everyone's at home, so they're probably using email as well, right? Because they've been forced to work from home. So I will waive just for this. Just for the length, for the duration, we will waive the old thing. And of course, you can join the independent company, soon to be a battalion, possibly a regiment. That's on the Patreon website. A huge amount of comment and debate goes on there every day, and it's great fun. And to be amongst the similarly afflicted is a beautiful thing. I think we can agree on that, James.
We certainly can. Cheerio.
See you soon. Bye.